This conference will now be recorded.
It's just right at 6. We'll wait a minute or two.
That's what I'm talking about. Al Durante should be coming because he has an update to give us. Right now, we don't have anyone from Pennsylvania yet.
Okay.
Women choose Renew Life probiotics because they're made for us.
We are back at it.
Premium probiotic strains, formulated, tested,
It's gonna
and
be like
guaranteed
nothing
for a
we-
woman's digestive system.
And I think your mic is on.
We've got one caller number 1. Don't know who that is.
Dave, you know you're way out of focus.
I know, we were just talking about that. I don't know if it's poor lighting in this in my den here, or I smeared something across my camera lens. I've been wiping it for like 20 minutes. But see, that's a plus for you on the other side of the camera. So, all right, so it's 6:02, almost 6:03. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Carries aboard, okay. And Leah, will you do a roll call, please?
Chair, would you like to read the statement or have that read?
I'm sorry, yes. No, that's Stacy's supposed to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Due to the nature of the declaration of a state of emergency due to novel coronavirus COVID-19, pursuant to Code Section 2.2-3708.2, this meeting is to be held by electronic communications via the web platform GoToMeeting. The catastrophic nature of this declared emergency makes it impractical and unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and the purpose of this meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body.
Okay, now we can proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, CTAF members. I will be taking roll call. At this time, you may take a moment to unmute your mics. If you have technical or volume issues, please type your name into the chat box for our records. Chair McLaughlin has called the meeting to order and his attendance has been noted. I will continue with localities, beginning with the city of Fredericksburg, Mr. Joshua Brock.
Present.
Mr. John Castellarin.
Here.
Mr. Matthew Rowe.
Here.
Thank you. For Spotsylvania County Vice Chair, Mr. Al Durante.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Neil Holleran.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Stan Huey. Mr. Josh Templeton. Mr. Anton Stubbs.
Here.
Thank you. For Caroline County, Mr. Ken Pogue. Mr. Michael Hoyt. Mr. Justin Chenault. For Stafford County, Mr. Melvin Allen Sr. Mr. David Swan. Ms. Ethelene Crenshaw.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Glenn Goldsmith. Mr. Wade Sudress.
Here.
Thank you. For King George County, Dr. Robert Gates, I believe he did send us notice that he would not be at the meeting. At large members, Mr. Larry Gross.
Here.
Mr. Rupert Farley.
Did you say Rupert Farley?
Yes, sir.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Dustin Savage. Roll call has been taken. Please put your mics back on mute unless recognized by the chairman to speak. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 3, is to approve the agenda that we have in front of us today.
So
Discussion. Okay, thank you very much. Second, that was Rupert, by the way.
Right.
Do we have a second? Do we have a second to approve the meeting, the agenda?
I'll second. John Kessler.
Thanks, John. Is there any discussion, any changes need to be made? Okay, hearing none, seeing none. Is there anybody who's opposed to the agenda as written? Hearing none, seeing none. Is there anybody who wants to abstain from the agenda as written? Hearing none, seeing none. The agenda is approved as written. Now we'll move to the meeting minutes, item number 4, which is an action item, and we need to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting as written.
I move approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Rupert. Is there a second?
Second, this is Al.
Thanks, Al. Is there any discussion of the minutes from the last meeting?
This is Josh Brock. The only thing I can see in my review of the minutes from the last meeting is under number 5 during the quoting of the initial public comment. The word "huge," at least in my copy, seems to be spelled H-U and then F-A-F-A-G-E. So there just seems to be some kind of transposition or a typo there. So other than that, everything looks okay to me.
Excellent, thank you. So is there any other discussion? So shall we approve the minutes as with that one typo that will be corrected?
Yes.
Anybody against? Does anybody want to abstain because they were not present and did not get to review the meeting online afterwards?
Ethelene, I am
abstaining.
Okay, here, Ethelene and
Matt Rowe.
Matt, okay. All right, nobody's opposed. I've got the abstentions. Then the meeting minutes will be approved as written with the one correction. Okay, now we are going to move to item number 5, which is a review of the policy committee meeting. And there's going to be a couple of little sub briefings that expand on stuff that was covered at the policy committee meeting. So we'll have, for those of us who did not have these briefings, because they're really good, the administrative report especially, you'll have the benefit of seeing them. And go ahead, Stacy, I believe.
Yeah, so before I turn it over to Ian here, we're doing this a little differently since you'll recall that the policy committee hadn't met since October. So much of the business that they took action on is kind of old business and things that you all already have seen. since you were meeting regularly. So we decided it'd probably be best to present what staff presented in a more condensed form to you all tonight. So first we're going to have Ian give his administrator report, and then we'll talk about the public comment period that is now open that the policy committee approved at their last meeting, and then briefly mention the CTEC at-large openings. So Ian, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and thank you very much, Chairperson. You have, I believe, in the pack the full report which I gave to the policy committee. So what you're going to see today is an abridged version of that. I'm not going to go through everything that I went through in the policy committee meeting because I might make your meeting a little long, and some of you will have seen the full version of the presentation. So I'm going to start immediately, go straight into it, give you a short version, and then if there are any questions, I'll happily take that at the end, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I looked at the COVID-19 impacts on traffic and ridership on our transit systems. Next slide. If you look at this, these are two VDOT slides. The upper red line shows you what is happening with freight traffic on our roads through the Commonwealth of Virginia, and you can see the line marked 0. That is what the traffic would have been this time a year before, in other words, a year ago. So if it's above the line, it's higher than last year. If it's below the line, it's lower than last year. And you can see immediately the red line is above last year, up to 10, 15% above last year. That's the freight traffic, the trucks on the roads and the highways. You can see we're having, even during COVID, we're having much higher freight volumes on the roads than normal. And the lower line shows you all vehicles, which includes, of course, the majority of cars on the roads. And that is below normal. So COVID has definitely had an impact on the number of cars on the road, but it has pushed up probably the number of trucks if that would not have been the normal growth trend. Next slide. This shows you the same kind of data, but this is for the morning peak traffic, the rush hour so-called. And you can see through the whole of last year, the dip where everything goes down in the middle. That's when COVID hit really badly and all the traffic came to a standstill. But if you follow those graphs for the AM peak period, both the top graph, which is the interstate traffic, and the bottom graph, which is the non-interstate traffic, you can see a similar trend that it's all trending back up again. And there is a slight difference between the midweek traffic and the weekend traffic. Through the state of Virginia, the midweek traffic in the morning peak hours, in the morning peak hours are lower than normal by quite a margin. But the weekend peak hour traffic is actually almost at the pre-COVID levels. So that is just quite an unusual thing to note in those graphs. Next. If we look at that, how that impacts us in terms of transit and the local area, we've just looked at some of the trends there. Next slide. This is bus ridership across the United States. We've picked 5 or 6 transit systems. The black line is the Fred bus system through last year, and the other lines are similar transit systems around the country. And you can see that when COVID hit around between March and April, all of the bus ridership went down, but you can see that it's climbing back up again. Next slide. This is the train ridership. So this is particularly commuter rail. The black line again is the VRE, Virginia Rail Express, and you can see there that across the country, commuter rail services crashed in April, and unlike the bus ridership, it's taking much longer to recover. Next slide. This then looks at the 3 key transit systems in our area, the Fred bus ridership in red, the OmniRide buses in blue, and the green line is the VRE rail. And you can see, if you look at the numbers, that Fred is already back to 50% of the ridership it had before COVID happened. OmniRide is already at almost 2/3 of the ridership they had before COVID, but the VRE rail system is very low down. That follows the national trend. People are going back to riding buses far quicker than they're going back to riding trains. And that's probably because people who ride trains probably have other options available to them, like the use of their private cars and so on. Next. If we look at our region, and I'm going to show you this in the next slide, and we look at the land use, where people live and where they work, compared with where the main transportation systems are, we can see some trends in our region. Next slide. This map shows you the density of where people live. And the darker the color, the more people per square mile live in that area. So if you look at this particular map, you can see the concentrations of the dark oranges, browns, reds are our most dense living areas. And the next slide will show you a little more of what the implications of that are. If you look in these red circles, you'll see that those are areas that are quite far away from our north-south transportation means. So the very black line moving north-south through your picture is the I-95 highway. Next to that, there's another north-south line, which is the Route 1 highway. And then you can see the dotted lines are the VRE rail system. Those go north-south from our region to Washington, D.C. and back, and also to Richmond. But the areas in red are quite far from those north-south lines relative to other areas. And those people have to travel first either to the I-95 or the Route 1 or to the VRE train stations if they work further north of us in Northern Virginia or DC. And that represents challenges for us in the future. If those areas grow, and if the new growth in our area in terms of houses, new housing built is in those areas or further out west or further east, it's going to cause congestion on our east-west roads because people have to get to the I-95 or whichever other major route they want to use to get to work. And we know that in our region, between 40 and 60% of the population that is of a working age work outside of our region and need to move great distances to get to work. Next. You'll see the shaded area here on this map is between the I-95 in red there and the VRE rail system on the right-hand side. Ideally, that's where you would like to see new developments take place because those are areas between the major north-south transportation systems. And so if the people who are going to be working in Northern Virginia or DC or even in Richmond, the closer that they live to those north-south corridors, the less congestion will occur when they have to drive or take a bus to get to work, to get onto the major north-south corridors. So ideally, that's where we'd like to see new housing and new businesses being built so that we reduce congestion in the area by bringing the people closer to the transportation system. Next. So the question that our different jurisdictions have to ask is, how do we bring the land use and the transportation together in the future? FAMPA doesn't control land use or zoning regulations or the approval of building permits. We only do transportation. But of course, we know that land use, building new housing, and transportation work together because people have to travel. Next. Rail. Next slide. Just an overview of the rail system. Most of this on this slide you've already heard before. Some of it was discussed at your last meeting, so I'm not going to go over it again. It's in your pack, just the new trains that we're going to see arriving in the future. Next slide. This is something new. You may not be aware that the Metro Blue Line in Washington, D.C. is under investigation for a possible extension towards the FAMPA region, and they're doing a study at the moment to determine whether it's feasible to bring the blue line, the Metro Blue Line from Washington, D.C., all the way to the Quantico Marine Corps base, which is right on our doorstep. And they're asking for public comment at the moment, and there are various public fora where they're discussing this proposal. It may or may not happen, but they're certainly investigating, and the legislature has instructed that this be investigated and the feasibility of it be established. Next slide. Bus transit, just another quick overview. Historically, it's not been a major transportation mode in Fredericksburg and the Fampo region because of density and employment locations, behavior patterns, and so on. The current director and deputy director inherited this bus system that was in a steep ridership decline, and they're now working to turn it around. We wish them well, but just to show you the numbers on the next slide, please. You can just see that the green in that bar chart indicates the national trend of bus ridership in the United States before COVID. That is an average that I made of 180 bus systems around the United States in the green, and the red is where our local Fred bus system is relative to that. Those are different scales, but it just gives you an idea of trend, really, nothing more. And you can see that the Fred bus was doing really, really well in terms of ridership in 2011, 2012, 2013, but has since dropped off quite significantly, and we need to turn it around. Next slide. This represents a 46% ridership drop before COVID hit, which is a worrying trend. Next slide. Just to look around the area, I sent one of the staff to take photographs of bus stops around the area, and you can see they're not easy to identify. If you look in those 4 photographs and try and spot where a bus stop is, they're hard to see. They're very small signs, and they're in black and white, and against the background of the sky, they disappear. And if you move into the area as a new resident, like I did in November, you find it's quite difficult to locate where the bus system is and where the bus stops are and how the system works if you don't know what to do. Next slide. So a way forward for FAMPO. These are some proposals I've made. Next slide. So there are future studies which I believe we should be undertaking. The first one is an east-west mobility study. How do we look at the movements of people, motor cars, buses, from wherever people live to where they work, and how that occurs on an east-west basis? Many of the highways that are being upgraded right now or extended are travel in a north-south direction, and the VRE rail system travels in a north-south direction. But what about the east-west movement of people? When you get off the I-95, where do you go? When you get off the VRE bus, how do you get home? You're going to move on another road or a highway that's going to move east and west, and those roads are going to become increasingly congested over time. So I'm proposing we have a study to look at how to prevent future congestion moving people east and west, and also freight and goods. Secondly, a Fred bus ridership study and recommendations. Fred is actually doing this, so we're not going to be doing it as FAMPO. A new scenario plan framework for our long-range transportation plan. Some of the data used in the 2045 LRTP are a little out of date now, and we want to update those. A broad mobility and accessibility survey. I think one of the things we should be asking the public is, why don't you take the bus? Why don't you take the train? Why don't you use your bicycle? And find out why people choose the transportation systems and the modes of transportation that they do, in order to inform us as planners how to plan better systems for the public. And finally, in the future, I think we should also study the freight movement in the area. I don't know if any of you have noticed the increase in freight trucks on the highways, but there's certainly been an increase, and it's borne out by the data. There are many more trucks on the road than there were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And this is adding to congestion. We need to understand where the freight is coming from and where it's going to, and seeing if we can make it more efficient to move freight through the FAMPO region and beyond our boundaries. Next slide. Rail abandonment, I'm not going to go into this in much detail. It's a concept. Next slide. It's just a concept to protect railroad lines when they get abandoned, and to use them for things like hiking and bicycling and other pursuits. It began in Virginia in 1983. Next slide. We have one railroad that was abandoned historically, which is the historic Virginia Central Railway, which you know about. Portions of it are converted into a bike and ped pathway. Portions of it are not. This last section of it was abandoned in 1984. Next slide. That's just a close-up look at it. You can see if you look at this particular map, the VCR railway, the sections in white are the current trails, so portions of the line that have been converted to trails. The yellow sections are owned by the counties and the city. The purple are the privately owned sections, which have been allowed to fall into private hands, which make it difficult for us to join up these trails or to perhaps use this old VCR right-of-way for other transportation purposes. Next slide. What could we have done with that VCR trail if we still had the full right-of-way? We could have perhaps put a light rail train like the Purple Line tram that's being built in Maryland right now. We could have copied that. Or we could have put a bus rapid transit system operated by the Fred bus. We could have put a bus lane on that historic railroad. Or we could do a scooter and bike to work trail on that line if we could get all the pieces that are in private hands back, or at least a portion of them. So that's something to think about. When railroads get abandoned or closed down, we need to think carefully about how we can better use what is already an established transportation right of way in a better way for the public, because sometimes these fall away and are gone, and then you can't get it back again later. Next slide. Staffing. The block on the left shows the staffing complement when I arrived at FAMPO in November. Lots of part-time people, lots of interns, administration staff, but a limited number of full-time planners. I'm trying to change that picture. So my first intervention, as you can see on the right-hand side, is that I did not renew the contracts with the interns, and we've done away with one of the part-time planner jobs and made it a full-time planner job, and we've appointed Matthew Lahane, who's operating the slides tonight, as a full-time planner with FAMPO. So we've got already more full-time staff and less part-time staff and more planners at FAMPO to be able to serve you and the community. Next slide. Finally, I've just encouraged the staff to specialize and to learn new skills. Encourage them to take courses, to go to conferences, to read up, to speak to colleagues in other MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations around the state and the country, to learn some new skills. There'll be some further developments, but so far I think that the team as a staff are doing really well, and we've had some significant achievements in the last month. We had a very successful policy committee meeting. We had we have submitted our application for a grant for the East-West mobility study, which we've already submitted, and we're hoping for a successful outcome. We've had a great result from our round 4 of the Smart Scale program, where a number of our projects were approved for funding as a first shot, and I think that's a wonderful achievement for the month of January. So I think 2021 for us at FAMPO is looking good, and I think we're in a very good place right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't say any more. It's over to you.
Well, thank you, Ian. So there was a lot covered there, and I would suspect there's some significant number of questions and discussion from the members. So please go ahead.
This is Rupert.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Rupert, I hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, back on slide 17, something caught my attention that didn't seem quite right. The overview map.
17.
Yeah.
Rupert, which slide 17 are we referring to? This is slide
Overview
17.
map. Overview map.
It's one of the maps, Matthew.
There you go, right
Are they-
there. Yeah, that one.
Awesome.
This one.
Yeah. It says there that the impact of land use affects transportation immensely. It strikes me that that phrase is exactly backwards, that the transportation that's available affects land use immensely. That's the way it always has been ever since, you know, way back in history, hundreds of years. The free market economy steps in and takes advantage of whatever transportation routes are available. Like back in the day, Fredericksburg, it was the river. And these days, you know, it's the interstates or whatever free roads we're making available. So I'm thinking that that phrase is backwards.
Richard, I think that you do make a valid point. What this slide is getting at is that when we have an existing road system and a rail system, developers and other people come along and build housing further and further away from the transportation system because land is perhaps less expensive or it's undeveloped, so it's easier to build on. And so what tends to happen is a thing we call urban sprawl, which is when people build further and further out from our cities and towns. And what that then does is it puts more and more cars on the smaller roads. And then there's pressure on the authorities to build bigger and bigger roads and highways and add a lane and add an intersection and so on. So you are quite right that the transportation system that exists does attract more development, but it also works the other way where development needs to happen and it gets built without direct reference to the transportation system. So often a developer might put up 170 new houses, but the road is still the same width as it was, a narrow little country road. But now you've got 170 houses times however many cars per household that have to get onto that road to get into town. And so that creates congestion. So often the development of new housing at a big scale, many new houses, will impact the transportation system because the transportation system isn't always able to be upgraded in the area where the new housing gets built because it costs a lot of money, public money, to build the roads often and to build the train lines, etc. So, I mean, the two affect each other. The transportation system affects construction of housing and business premises, but business premises and housing construction also affects the transportation system. I suppose they're in a relationship.
Thank you. That doesn't change a thing about what I said, but thanks for the observations. There was another observation that caught my attention on slide 22, talking about the bus system.
Yeah, so these slides are a shortened version of the full one that's in your pack. So if you could just tell us what's on the slide, we'll refer to
it. It says bus, and it begins historically.
Yes.
And I thought bus transit, was a major mode of transportation back when I was a kid. I mean, I used, whenever it was a rainy day, I took the bus to school instead of riding my bike. And a lot of people, it seemed to me then that, you know, people we knew would take the bus downtown to go shopping. And I thought the colonial transit system was basically, an adequate bus system. And that statement there just didn't seem quite correct when I read it.
Perhaps the wording isn't quite accurate. The point is that I don't think the bus system has grown as the area has grown in terms of houses and.
No, absolutely not. The bus system died back in the 60s. It was eliminated completely.
Yeah.
And then they came back with Fred, which is really not a bus system. It's just a, sort of social services program.
Yeah, perhaps the word historically there shouldn't. Well, it muddies the waters in a sense because it depends how far back you want to go, I suppose. So yes, the word historically perhaps.
Probably I'm the only one that's old enough on the committee to have that catch your attention. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, Rupert, this is Dave Swan. I take exception to that rule about age on the committee. Good evening. I'm sorry I was on another call when the meeting started, but I'm on. And just a comment, I've used the bus pretty extensively in the 90s and not into 2000 though, commuting north-south. And we had a pretty vibrant bus system, even though I think it was under-regulated by the Commonwealth. I've ridden some buses that were pretty shaky. And back in those days, I'm trying to remember the name of one of the companies. I think it was J&W. And these are companies that would do local excursions on the weekends to places like Williamsburg and I guess Norfolk and Richmond. And they'd operate out of the commuter lots. And that, I don't think that's being used. I don't commute anymore north-south other than in my car to Quantico. But we did have bus service, and it was probably replaced by van pools. And I've used those as well. So I just wanted to make that comment. No offense to Rupert.
I think you're quite correct, sir. I think that the van pools have come into the space left as the long commuter buses have, the privately run commuter buses have come to an end. I think the van pools have moved into that space, and we certainly have, I think, the biggest or close to the biggest van pool system in the state. So it's clear that something else was there before, and I think the something else is what you pointed to, the commuter buses, which no longer really operate as private organizations.
Yes, sir, I agree. And I'll tell you, from my view on the van pools, even though some of these municipalities around here claim that they give great incentive to the van pool company owners to operate, they don't. And for instance, Stafford County doesn't get any breaks. I think maybe Spotsy, I'm not sure. And Prince William at one time, I think, was giving van pools a break on their personal property tax. But that's probably something that should be looked at by FAMPO or by GWRC as far as how van pools are being encouraged, treated, regulated, whatever.
It's certainly something that we're aware of, and I hope with our East-West mobility study, the first phase of it, if we get the approval, the funding, would look at TDM, which is van pools, and transit systems that currently operate, the Omni rides, the Fred buses, the VRE systems, and look at how we can better use those in the future to move people. So we certainly will be looking at that in the future if we get the funding approval to do that particular study.
Excellent.
Who else has questions or comments?
This is John Castellari, and I actually have a question about, I believe it's slide number 13, the one with the difference between the freight and the automobile. And you mentioned this a couple times, that about, no, that's not it. It's the second slide you actually had on this one.
Right to the top, Matthew. Right to the top.
The top.
Right to the top.
You mentioned the freight
We're talking about up here? Yes.
Yeah, that person right there. He talked about the freight increase that we were seeing, and its differentiation in actually the slide right before this one. How do you know whether this increase was a result of the COVID? Because if I'm reading this correct, right around August, it would even the freight shipment was below what we expected, what we had last year, or what we had in 2019. So is this growth something that now after COVID hit, this is actually what we would have expected to have on a normal basis? So I know that long range stuff has like freight rail, but I'm not so sure freight rail is going to be the only possible answer to dealing with this freight increase if it's going year to year.
I think we should clarify what we're saying here. This is a map of traffic per week or per month, and you can see the dates at the bottom of the graph of what is happening in reality. The zero line represents what happened in that same month or that same week 1 year before. So I'm not suggesting that the freight has increased on the roads like this because of COVID, because this is essentially freight on the main roads and the highways. It's not on your local street where your house is. So technically, this is saying that the annual amount of freight vehicles on the roads has gone up significantly compared to last year. Even though COVID has happened, it hasn't stopped the freight from growing, and the freight is growing at a significant level. It's not a small increase that we're seeing in the total freight increase. The total traffic line, the blue one, that includes cars, and we know from the other slide and from other data that the car traffic on the highways particularly has gone down, particularly on midweek days in the peak period. The car traffic has gone down. The total traffic of cars hasn't gone down as much, but the peak period traffic on the main roads and highways of cars has gone down. So it seems, looking at these graphs, that COVID has not reduced the freight traffic at all on the roads, and that it has gone up in spite of COVID. So perhaps COVID is not having any effect on the amount of freight moving on the I-95, Route 1, Route 3, etc. The freight is growing year to year at a significant rate. I'm not sure that there's been a massive impact on freight of having COVID one way or the other, except when it comes to your local house. I think that the home delivery of freight has increased during COVID, but that wouldn't show necessarily in these numbers, because I don't think these traffic counters are counting right outside your house. They're counting on main roads, on highways, and on other locations. So the year-to-year increase of general freight on the roads is definitely going up, and it has not been negatively impacted by COVID.
So this is basically telling us that if it hadn't been for the drop of the automobiles, we would have seen from year to year rather, because if I'm not mistaken, towards the end there, it's getting a 10% increase.
Yes.
For freight, it's getting darn close to that. We would have seen about a 10% increase in traffic in a long term from year to year, from 2018 to 2019 to 2020. We're seeing that continued growth almost exactly like that, or is this just like, is this a current peak, or?
Well, the freight is growing from year to year in each year. But this graph just shows that it's not slowing down the rate of freight growth on our roads. And that's why at the end of this presentation, I showed that one of the items in the way forward is that I think we need a study of the freight movements in our area in our region because freight is becoming a significant traffic problem. And the freight trains on the north-south CSX line are full. There are many every day, and the freight trucks on our roads and highways are significant. And the growth of those trucks, number of trucks on the road, is significant. That means we're going to create more and more congestion because of freight that's traveling on the roads and not on the rail system. And I think we should study that and work out some ways of ameliorating the effects of that on congestion, because it's not just cars now that are creating congestion, it's also freight trucks.
Thank you.
Is there another question?
I'd just like to sort of add my feeling to that is that even if this is at least partially due to COVID, which I think it might be. I mean, I understand what you're saying about local roads because, you know, you're having stuff delivered right to your door. But, you know, I don't think it's going to decrease after COVID because I think people are getting used to the convenience of shopping at home. And yeah, I think that's going to be, I mean, things are going to somewhat change in various aspects of our lives due to COVID on a permanent basis. So, you know, I mean, this is something that I think we really need to take a long, hard look at.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're definitely not going to see a drop in freight traffic after COVID. Absolutely not. So you're quite correct about that.
I got a question if you can hear me. This is Larry.
Larry, we can hear you.
I was curious where you're getting this data from, and is it coming from NRIS? And how are they differentiating between cars and trucks?
So this is data presented by VDOT at our Metropolitan Planning Organization quarterly meeting. So I'm not 100% sure where they're getting their counts from, what their data source is. I can find that out for you and get it to you by tomorrow, but I don't actually have it in front of me. But it's statewide. VDOT is collecting the data and making the graphs to present to the planning organizations around the state. So it covers the whole state, all the major highways and roads throughout the state. So this is the average across the state of Virginia. And it's VDOT's data. They've been collecting it via third parties and so on.
Okay, it's not a big deal. I was just curious.
All right, that was a very meaty presentation. There's a lot to it, and Ian scaled it down, skinnied it down from what he had presented to the PC. If you have follow-up questions, go to you. I think one of my takeaways from this is that Ian coming here with a whole set of new eyes to look at some of our issues and is looking at things a little bit differently and bringing up some questions and some observations that are very valid, and just ones that we may not have picked up on ourselves. So I think my compliment to you, Ian, for what you've brought to the table here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate your compliments. I'll hand over to you for the next item, or to Stacy.
Yeah, Stacy, yep.
Sure. So Matthew is pulling up on the screen now. Our public involvement webpage is what you're looking at. During the last policy committee meeting, they approved a public comment period that started on January 26th, and it's going to end on February 24th. And what it relates to is the FAMPO staff's work plan, known as the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP for short. And it also gives you a link to the UPWP page from the public involvement page. And it describes in more detail that the UPWP programs all of the work that FAMPO staff hopes to accomplish in the fiscal year. Whenever we have a change that needs to be made to the work program, it has to go through a public comment period. So right now, Since the policy committee has hired new staff, one of the steps we need to take is to do some paperwork with regard to hiring non-citizen staff. And policy was aware of that. VDOT has said, though, that we need to add specific language into the UPWP. So the comment period just gives the public a chance to weigh in if they'd like, but mostly this is just for transparency as well. There will be a public hearing if there's any concerns or questions during the next policy committee meeting, which is on February 22nd, and that's going to be a virtual public hearing. Matthew, you want to move to the next item? And then finally, real quick, we gave the policy committee members an update that there are 3 at-large CTAC spots open. The policy committee are the ones who would approve at-large members. So we've made them aware of that. And please also do pass the word around to those you know, share on social media to reach those you might know. And we hope to have those spots filled soon. And it's back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Stacy has informed me that as far as we know ahead of prior to the meeting, that we do not, no one has submitted anything in writing, and we don't have anybody who's asked to speak. Now, having said that, if there is anyone who's dialed up, there are a few just call-ins here, and or you want to speak, this is a public hearing, and we welcome your public comments. Is there anyone there who would like to speak at this time? Okay, then there will be one other opportunity to speak at the end if someone dials in late or something catches their attention as we continue through the meeting. Okay, so I'll end the public comment at this time, and now we invite our guest speaker from the Healthy Generations Area Agency on Aging. And her perspective on the transit capabilities and that they provide in support of our aging. Dave Swan, guys. Okay, go ahead, please. Thanks. Thanks, Tamara.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Tamara Banks. I am with Healthy Generations Area Agency on Aging with the Mobility Options Program. So I'm gonna give you a little background about myself. I've been in transit about 20 plus years. I've started in EMS as an EVOC instructor, which I taught people how to drive ambulances and fire trucks, to now as a travel trainer. And before I was travel trainer, I was an accident investigator for the DCA, the airport, for bus accidents on the airfield. So I have a nice little extensive background in transportation. What I want to talk to you about is travel training in the region. I work directly with Fred, but I do not work for Fred. So that's one misconception. So I want to make sure we understand. So, and Healthy Generations Mobility Options Program, we're like a combined mobility management, mobility operations, which is funded through the 5310 grant administered by the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. The grant is known as the Enhanced Mobility and Seniors for Individuals, Seniors and Individual with Disabilities. I'm sorry, I'm reading some of my notes here. And our goal is to remove barriers for transportation for the disadvantaged population in our planning district. And we are geared towards seniors and people with disabilities, individual with disabilities. Right now, I am opened up. I can actually train anybody who comes to the area that wants to learn about how to utilize Fred Transit and the public transportation. As a travel trainer, I go out and I talk to people about how to ride Fred, the safety of riding Fred, how to use their programs like Route 2.0, Google Trip Planner. I teach you about personal safety when riding the bus, crosswalk safety, how to utilize and understand traffic lights. You would be surprised how many of our seniors and our people with language barriers do not understand traffic lights and crosswalk safety. Route 2.0 is a game changer. Mr. Hollis, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to talk with me so I can show you how to use Route Shout. Route Shout is an app that you can download on your phone that will tell you when the bus comes, the time the bus comes, where the bus is, your route. It even tells you where you are and the nearest buses that are near you. It's a game changer, truly. When I first started riding the bus, I had to go get paper schedules. Now you don't have to get a paper schedule. You just download it, an app, just like you would download DoorDash or Uber. So Fred Transit, actually, it goes all over our region. I take the Fred Transit bus at night. I'll park at the Giant, and I will take the ELN2, which takes you all around downtown Fredericksburg. So you can park, go downtown, have a great meal, and come on back. And not having to worry about parking downtown, traffic congestion. We are just out there. And Fred Transit is an integral part of our region. It helps people get back and forth to work, doctor's appointments, and it also alleviates traffic and builds commerce in the area. One thing, when I talk to riders, because I actually go out and I soapbox, which means I go out and I talk to anybody who will listen to me about public transportation. Basically, they're talking about accessibility. How do I get to the bus stop? Where is the bus? How long does it take to get there? These are things that the public really is not educated on. That's why our ridership has not been the best and been the greatest, because again, there's a stigma about riding the bus. It's for poor people. It's for, as I heard in this meeting, is a social service. It's a public service that anybody can go, get on the bus, save your gas, $1.25 each way. And the new deputy director and director, they are working on some significant changes to increase service, extend hours, and make sure that people know that this is a viable service to have. In the future, I really would like to see more commerce. We get that commerce from public transportation. A lot more people would work in the area if the bus system was able to get to those areas. Right now, I'm lucky I can take the bus to work. There's my choice to drive because of where the bus stop is. But however, there are people out there that can't drive, or not because they don't have a license or they're incapable, it's because maybe their age or their physical ability keeps them from being able to drive. One thing we always have to think about, one day someone's going to take our keys and our license. How are we going to get around? It's coming. It's coming. Fred Transit goes to the ball field. It goes to Mary Washington Hospital, downtown, all the courthouses. It's a viable system here. I would love to travel train everybody in Fredericksburg, Sanford, Spotsylvania on how to use Fred Transit and ride. I've been lucky enough to take our GWRC members so they can see the significance of Fred Transit, where it goes, and the importance it is for our community. So do I have any questions?
No? Okay, well, Tamara, I said it wrong the first time. I think I got it right now. So you know, now on the agenda are some videos of the app that is available for, for your smartphone for people to use. They're really well done. Looks like the system's very good. The way it looks very user friendly, and so I was impressed with that. Now I thought, Tamara, you were just going to run us through that, but you've actually gone far above that and on a broader scale, and just talked about how we're supporting the community. So that for the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, it was very, very apropos, and thank you for that and opening our eyes in some areas.
This is Rupert Farley. I have a question.
Go ahead, Rupert.
How many apps did you consider before you settled on Route Shout?
As again, sir, I do not work for Fred Transit. I work for Healthy Generations Area Agency on Aging. So that would definitely be a question that has to be directed to Fred Transit.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome, sir.
Kind of an ominous question.
Yeah, it was, because it got terrible reviews, and I was just wondering if the other ones out there are that much worse, or whether for some reason we decided on one that got terrible reviews. I was just curious.
Well,
no,
actually, so I can answer that.
At a future meeting.
I'm sorry. I can actually answer that.
Good.
If you download the app, you see Route Shout is pretty much all over the country with smaller services, and with the exception of SEPTA. A lot of people download Route Shout or any other app and don't take the time to learn how to use it. That's where I come in. I show you step by step how to use the program. Many transportation planners, transit trainers across the country, which I have spoken with, have the same thing. Is user error. It's so simple to use that people make it complicated.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'm not, as the head of FAMPA, I'm also not from FredBus, but I can tell you that one of the proposals I've heard them speaking about for the new financial year is to start the FredBus schedule from 7 a.m. And at the moment, they don't start until 8 a.m. And if they get that approved by their board and they start operating from 7 a.m., that will be a significant change to their span of service, which means that for those people who need to be at work at 8 a.m., they will be able to use the bus because they can now get on the bus from 7 or 7:30 and get to their work by 8 a.m. Whereas right now, if the bus only begins operating at 8 a.m., some people can't use it to get to work because it starts too late. That'll be a significant change, and I think we should welcome that, and I hope they do get it approved and begin to operate from earlier hours in the morning, because I think that will be a fantastic improvement that people who go to work will be able to use.
No, and I think you're right. It goes back to your earlier comment about getting the word out about what's available. And Tamara touched on the same thing: is how do we get people to know about the system and how to use it properly and use the tools that are available to them. So I think it's I think that's a challenge for us. And so we'll continue with that. All right. Our Vice Chair, Al Durante, is going to give us an update on what's going on down at the assembly down in Richmond regarding transportation, specifically a transportation improvement zone. Al?
You're muted.
I'm off mute. Okay. I feel like I should have some slides, but there's a slide. So there's a lot of information here. I'm going to start off by saying that, well, basically I'm going to talk about House Bill 1910, which went through 2 versions and then was pulled. The article in the paper had a number of mistakes, factual mistakes in it, but I mean, basically the bill didn't fail. The bill was pulled by the patron. Originally, the House Bill 1910 was patroned by Josh Cole and co-patroned by Scott Serville in the Senate. And Mark Cole was also of Spotsylvania, and well, he serves all the way up to Fauquier, was also a co-sponsor. And it was a very sort of general bill. It wasn't specific to this area. It was basically a bill that allowed any 2 members of a regional transportation region, doesn't quite make sense, but to get together and form a regional transportation authority. And the regional transportation authority has taxing ability, among a number of other things. So, you know, it has a lot more power. It is an actual authority. There was a little pushback on that, I guess. There's been, you know, pushback back and forth throughout this process. But the main reason that that bill was amended was that there was a loophole in it that sort of went against, I think, which could have created the opportunity to go against what the bill was trying to achieve. So then they amended it, and it passed the committee, the subcommittee. They amended it and put in a more specific bill that was basically to develop a Fredericksburg Regional Transportation Improvement Committee, which, as you read through it, and certainly, and actually you can go to the LIS, which is up in front of you, and put in HB 1910 and look at the various versions of this. I don't know how much you want me to go into description of who exists or who should have existed as parts of these different committees and authorities, but
Al, I think we all know that making sausage is painful and ugly, and we don't want to do it. So
right.
Where
this was planning to just talk about.
And what's the impact on us at this point?
Well, with this, it would have allowed three. Well, I think the actual point of it would have been to attempt to sort of even the playing field among the more rural and the less rural. I mean, make everybody have an even hand. And you know, of course, this bill, like most bills, developed out of a suggestion from a community member. And that's the original bill. But so basically, this would have established a regional transportation improvement committee comprised of the localities in Planning District 16, which is our planning district. And it basically was, I don't want to get into how many meetings a year they had. The big concern here was, well, the difference actually is that the Regional Transportation Authority considers economic development. I mean, it's not just about road wear and usage, and I mean, it has a sort of greater consideration. Whereas the RTA is just, it really is just, it's a kind of an advisory committee almost. They develop a plan for future transportation. Sounds very much actually like what FAMPO does. But again, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But Al, we've got, it's really kind of a lot of a moot point, isn't it?
Yes, because this bill was pulled because a couple of, actually, one of the people who sort of went against it was one of the co-patrons, Mark Cole, who also works for Spotsylvania County. So he sort of, I think, has a dual role. And so the two larger counties basically wrote letters to the Transportation Commission about their displeasure about this. What's interesting is that one of their big criticisms was, and Mark Cole sort of used this term specifically, that it was representation, it was taxation without representation. Now, that's sort of odd because by the time they sent these letters, the bill had already been amended to be a TIC. So it no longer had taxing authority. So that being said, I'll kind of leave it where it is. I do think that this bill is some version of this bill will be back in the future. So if you have questions or issues with it, or just want to know more, I would suggest you contact Josh Cole or his office, and you know, let him know what you're thinking, or ask your questions or your concerns. Are there any questions more specific or?
Any questions from the members?
This is Larry Gross.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Larry.
I just want to point out that like VRE is in that same situation. They do a 2.1% or something like that regional gas tax, and they're not really elected either. And I think Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads both have some sort of regional tax district. I don't think MPOs can do this. I don't think federal MPOs can levy a tax or collect tax or deal with funds in that way. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but so I don't know. It looks like to me that VRE does that, and they've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, no, when I was comparing it to FAMPO, I was comparing the second version, the TIC version, as opposed to the Regional Transportation Authority, which does have taxing authority and like I said, has a much they paint with a much broader brush, let's say, in terms of what they consider when they're looking at transportation.
Yeah, I kind of thought.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I interrupt you. Sorry.
No, I was going to just say the TIC is more of, like I said, more of a kind of a planning. They take their findings and submit them I think it's every 5 years to the transportation board or the chair of the transportation board, who then. So, there is a little validity to the criticism maybe that it is just another layer of bureaucracy. Or that, well, I wouldn't say just another layer, but that it does add to the bureaucracy. But again, I think the attempt was to sort of even the playing field among, and maybe this is just my take on it, but, I've always been sort of curious, to use a polite word, curious about, why all the members in FAMPO don't sort of have an even, even input, why there are some members from some localities that don't get to vote. And I mean, I know why. I mean, I know the reasoning for it, but it seems like everybody, as we grow, everybody should have more input.
All right. Thanks, Al. So,
hey, while we're talking about the General Assembly, though, the other bill that was passed by Josh Cole presented that was passed was the renaming of Jeff Davis, and there have been some questions about that, because like Stafford's already renamed their section that was called Jeff Davis. So basically the bill passed through the House. Today is the first day of crossover, so it'll have to pass through the Senate. But what it basically does is gives them until January 1st to come up with a name change. The locality is responsible for the payment because that's the way it's always worked. And if they don't, then the name will become
Emancipation Highway.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So. And Stafford has complained, or not complained, maybe they're trying to get the state to pay for some of the cost of changing the name. But that's not the way it usually works, one, and two is they initiated the change. The state didn't order them to do it, so I don't think that's gonna happen.
Okay, thanks, Al. So I'm going to say a couple things. One is that Ian earlier talked about specialization of the staff, expanding their interests and things. And from what I understand, Stacy is going to be involved with this keeping track of the legislative actions. So that'll be interesting to hear in the future. And it's good to have somebody who's like permanently, or not permanently, but I mean, is attending to those issues. So thank you. The other thing is I apologize for being mute. I hope, and I see that Tamira, and I pronounced it correctly this time, Tamira is on the phone or still online. Thank you for Tamira. Ian said something about the communication and getting the word out about systems that are available to us and not being used because of communication. You mentioned the same thing. It's an ongoing issue. And thank you for bringing that to us. Thank you for your presentation. And I apologize, I muted myself.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move on now to the long-range transportation plan. We're going to get a presentation on kind of the public input stuff. The action item is indirectly evolved from that. And so I don't want to go, I'm going to ask Stacy to streamline her presentation, but I will say that, and one of the things that Ian did not talk about in this, but he's talked about at the policy committee, was he says, when we go through the LRTP, it's a 277-page document. It gets thrown out there and says, okay, public, give us your comments. And I'm putting words in your mouth, Ian, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it. My thoughts are that we give people 3 weeks to comment on this thing and comment on 200, even including the members of the committees like the TAC committee and ourselves. And it's not really a great way to do it. And Ian has kind of driven us out, says, why don't we do this a little more piecemeal? Take it, bites out of the elephant. And so the first bite out of the elephant is this, let's look at the foundational goals and objectives. They may not be used in the actual prioritization process or whatever, but they're foundational. And we got an opportunity from the public, the citizens that we represent, to input on this. And that's what Stacy is going to tell us about.
Yeah, so as Chair McLaughlin mentioned, this is going to be an action item, so you're going to want to pay attention. Just first, so what is the long range plan? That is the transportation plan for Stafford, Fredericksburg, and Spotsylvania that FAMPO staff compiles with the help from consultants, with the help from TAC members, and then ultimately the draft plan, which, as Dave mentioned, is a big, huge, thick document, is asked or shown to you guys and asked for your endorsement before the policy committee ultimately approves it. So this time around, we did something that I don't think has been done before. We asked the public through an online survey to help us develop the goals and the objectives for the region as a whole. So not just things that FAMPO should be working on, but things that anyone who does any kind of work that impacts transportation in our region, goals that they should be helping us work towards, and the objectives being the steps that we would ask them to help us take in order to meet those goals. Next slide, please, Matthew. So the importance of these goals, of course, one, we have to have goals and objectives in this plan. And they are going to convey what we want to accomplish by the year 2050. And the objectives set out the steps to take in order to achieve these goals. After these goals are adopted by the policy committee, and tonight we are going to ask you guys to endorse that, to endorse these goals and objectives, so we can pass on to the policy committee that you agree with them, so that they can use your feedback to make educated decisions. Can you scroll down a little bit, Matthew? There we go. Oh, a little too high. Okay, but well, yep, right there on the. Oh. Okay. Anyways, it must be something with scaling to the screen. After we adopt these goals and objectives, staff as well as the transportation professionals on TAC are going to have to try to find a way to implement these. So it's not just we're going to put them on paper and walk away. We really need to periodically measure how well we're meeting these goals. Okay, next slide. So you might recall that, what was it, maybe in November, or actually late October, we put out a draft online survey and asked for your feedback. Your feedback really helped us refine the questions that we were asking to the public to allow them to meaningfully participate and develop these goals and objectives. We took the original goals and objectives from the last long range plan. And with your feedback and TAC's feedback, we developed the survey. Next slide. This slide just shows a picture of the outreach. We did in-person outreach to get the word out that a survey was available. That was at the Fred Transit Terminal. Tamara Banks, who you just heard from, she joined us with that and helped promote that. Also, we had some news articles. The VRE published information on their website and with their rider newsletter. There was a press release, and I think that ran in Fredericksburg Patch. They picked up a story. You'll also notice a flyer, a picture of a flyer there. We had those around at the local breweries as well as the cafes with little take and tears for the public to take the survey in their own time. Next slide. Okay, so survey participation, we have never, ever in the history of FAMPO achieved such wonderful levels of participation. I think doing Facebook and social media ads really helped drive up that level, because we did have 670 people actually view the survey. 34% who viewed it actually took the survey, which that might seem kind of low, but given the subject matter, I'm very pleased with that. And even more pleased that of those who took the survey, they spent over 13 minutes on average really giving us great feedback. And that feedback resulted in 400 written comments that we've sorted through. Don't pull it up yet, Matthew, but on your agenda is a link to the full report that contains all of those comments. We've done the legwork and sifted through them to try to make sense, to use those to develop the new goals and objectives, which I'll show you in just a minute. But if you have some time, do kind of skip to the section in the report that has the comments. They are organized by category. It's pretty interesting to hear all the different takes from the public, and even more interesting to find the trends and the commonalities among those comments, which is really what we kind of honed in on to develop the goals and objectives. When we saw, there was a really large amount of feedback for a particular item, we developed that into the goal. Next slide, please. And this slide just says, kind of reiterates what I just said. We looked at the level of public support, we categorized the comments, and we adjusted the wording of the goals and objectives accordingly. Next slide. Okay, so I have some highlights for you of the public sentiment. First, and I'll give you just a few examples of the actual comments that kind of go to these. There was a great deal of comments, you won't be surprised to hear, stressing the importance that while it's great to have goals and objectives, we have to have regional cooperation and effective communication in order to achieve any of those. So we definitely want to highlight that, and we are highlighting that to all committees, not just this committee. For example, one of the comments on this said, notable and necessary goals, but it's going to take much political will and cooperation to realize them. On the second thing to point out, there were a lot of comments that the region needs not just a multimodal system, but that it has to be convenient, has to be interconnected and multimodal. For example, one of the comments was, please coordinate between all currently available public transportation options in this region for the daily long distance commuters specifically. If Fred shuttle buses consistently connected to VDOT slug lots and VRE stations, it would help stressed commuters have reliable alternative transit options. The third thing to highlight, there was a great deal of support for expanded and improved rail and Fred bus service. One of the things we heard on the topic of improvement was to work on the promptness of rail service, that delays are costly to parents with children in daycare and those who have second jobs at the end of their commute. We also heard there was a great desire to expand commuter rail service between Fredericksburg and DC to offer weekday service, more weekday service and to start weekend service. And the next one there, the blue logo, there were a great deal of comments asking us to implement some innovative ideas to solve congestion. Some included physical modifications such as adding lanes, but then also having robust TDM strategies, which is offering alternatives to those single occupancy vehicles. And finally, we also had a great deal of comments with regards to a concern that land use plans and transportation plans don't always complement themselves. One seems to be either too far ahead of the other, or the other really seems to lag behind for many, many years. Next slide, please. And so these are just the 7, is it? Yep, 7 goals, and we can skip this slide. And Matthew, can you pull up the full goals and objectives? This is the report. This is the report. So the next link, you can close the report. You all can look at the report on your own time. It's quite lengthy. We don't expect you to read it all. Okay, so you should have reviewed these in your packet. They are the goals and objectives that we are asking you to take action on tonight to endorse, and so that we can go to the policy committee and say that you all agree with them, and then the policy committee will consider adopting. TAC was presented with these the other week, and they did go ahead and endorse them.
Okay, Stacy, so I sent out an email to the members because we didn't really brief these to you. We talked about the process and everything, and then we throw them in front of you. And so it would have been unfair for me to kind of not recommend and highlight to you that, hey, you might want to look at these ahead of time. Now, having said that, we're not wordsmithing them. We're really looking for, is there something that just stands out as does not make sense, or is there some area that we have not even taken to account? So if you and anyone could be, if you didn't get a chance to look at them, you can abstain. There's nothing wrong with that. They were developed out of the 2045. We presented the 2045 to the public, including us committee members, and we had the opportunity, I don't know if you took advantage of it, but we had the opportunity to look at those and make suggestions about these goals and these objectives. So this isn't the first time we've seen them, or it isn't the first opportunity we've had to see them. But again, the beauty of what we're doing here is we're going to do this. We're going to attack this elephant in bites, and this is the first bite, the foundational thing. So, are there any? Is there just any discussion before I even ask for a motion on the goals?
This is Rupert.
Yes.
A few things caught my attention, like on line 1 there under goal 1, plan and build an active transportation. Plan and build active transportation options. I'm not familiar with the active transportation options. That hasn't come up in my tenure on FAMPO. I mean, I haven't heard of passive transportation options either. So what are we talking about here?
Sure, that's a good question. And this term does bring up a lot of confusion. If you attend any of the bike and pedestrian committees, they actually had a discussion about, what does this mean? Is it the proper phrase to use? Basically, active transportation is pedestrian and cyclists. Also, you would add in there scooters and people who use wheelchairs or other kind of physical assistance devices.
Well, since I don't know what it means, I suspect that a lot of other people don't know what it means. Maybe we should just delete that word, but that's just my thought on it. Actually, on the line above that, I also have a little trouble with interconnected multimodal, because that could be good or that could be bad. I mean, if you're talking about interconnected multimodal in that cars are kind of directed towards the countryside and transit is directed towards the urban areas, and you have an interface where they can connect, then I'm all with you. But if you mean by multimodal that both cars and mass transit should be able to service all areas, then that's an invitation for sprawl and basically not much improvement over what we're doing now. So what do you mean when you say multimodal?
I think focused and interconnected. You can take your bike, you can walk to, you can drive your car to a park and ride, you can drive your car down to the train station, get on a train station. I think interconnected is the key word there, multimodal.
All right, in that case, it sounds like a bad idea, because it's like, building parking lots, say for the baseball stadium. You know, if you that encourages people to take their cars, and they can also take the bus.
No, it's talking about having Fred bus connect to the train station in Fredericksburg, or the paths, the walking paths and bike paths that go somewhere and end up, and they make a connection with the Fred bus terminal, or they down at the VRE terminal, or from the person who's had to do a park and ride and can take their bike home. Yeah, I think it's more interconnected is the point.
You know, all that's fine, but what I'm objecting to is the possibility of this being interpreted as we're going to make everything accessible for buses, bikes, and cars. And we don't want to make everything accessible for buses, bikes, and cars. We've been doing that for the last 50 years, and it hadn't gotten us anywhere except worse.
Rupert, I would call your attention, and those who share those concerns, to what the objectives seek to accomplish. You'll note that they don't call for building more roads, that it calls for increasing regional mass transit, for ride sharing systems, for commuters, for lessening vehicle congestion, for developing a multimodal, so that's all different modes, that's affordable for users and convenient. And then again, in there again is lessen vehicle congestion one more time. So I don't think the objectives give an emphasis that we're going to increase the roadways and sprawl them out in order to connect everything, if that helps.
Okay. Do you have another objection, Rupert, or comment?
On that last line you highlighted, it says implement transportation alternatives that'll lessen vehicle congestion. What other alternatives would you consider other than transportation alternatives? I mean,
so again, this is one of those terms, jargon. I would call it jargon. So transportation alternatives would include the commuting modes, the public transit modes. So when we say transportation demand management, it's talking about transportation alternatives to single occupancy vehicles.
Okay. So what are examples of non-transportation alternatives that would lessen vehicle congestion? I mean, it sounds like if you're saying that it's jargon, we ought to delete the word transportation and just say implement alternatives. Because when I saw that,
calls.
Huh?
This was Neil. Sorry. Zoom calls is an alternative to non-transportation alternatives.
Okay. So we're not going to consider things like that in this transportation plan. That'll do. Thank you.
Those are considered in the transportation demand management, which is, it's included somewhere in here. So when we say transportation demand management as a whole, things that GW Ride Connect works on, one of the things is to promote working from home rather than commuting. So somewhere in here in one of the objectives.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. In one of the big concerns that you mentioned was the difference between, let's say, real estate or economic development, but more really real estate development and roadways to meet those needs by the increased development. And there's a particular example that comes to mind that we've discussed over the last year over on the border of Spotsylvania and Stafford, basically, well, more in Spotsylvania. But I mean, how would we, I mean, first of all, even a lot of the issues Rupert brought up, those are outside of our sort of purview, you know, it has to do with a lot of other moving parts. So I mean, where is that addressed, if anywhere in here? And is there anything we could do to make sure, that somebody doesn't decide to develop, 60 unit housing development, have a road go to that, and then the road doesn't get approved, the housing development doesn't suddenly disappear, how can we make those more interrelated? And
Mr. Chair, this is Ian Ollis again. If I can just talk to that particular item. Your question, sir, is exactly the reason that I went to great lengths in my presentation to show what happens when you don't connect the housing that you build with the transportation system. You then have all of that kind of problem that you're just illustrating. FAMPO doesn't have jurisdiction to control zoning ordinances or rezoning applications or building plans for houses or business premises. So FAMPO is developing with this process that's in front of you a long-range transportation plan, and we are encouraging through, like the presentation I've just done to politicians and to yourselves and to other community members, I'm trying to point out that the long-range transportation plan is not going to be able to prevent people building or wherever, but we're encouraging those of you who have influence with your communities, with your boards of supervisors and the city councilors, councilmen, to think about the zoning of your particular area, of the rezoning applications, of the building plan approvals, and so on, to try to bring land use and transportation together, to try to bring building housing in the appropriate places where there is a transportation system, or alternatively, to plan ahead. And that's what we do with this long-range plan that's in front of you. We try to plan ahead and try to think about where the new housing is going to be built and try to match the transportation improvements that come through this long-range transportation plan to the areas where it's likely that there's going to be more housing. Because if we don't match the two, as you've said, there's going to be a problem. So unfortunately, FAMPO only controls one half of that environment, which is the transportation environment. And I say controls very loosely because we don't control really, we facilitate. But your communities are involved with zoning, rezoning, building plan approvals, and all that kind of thing.
Al, does not goal 2, objective number 2, create transportation plans to complement plan development projected growth? Does that not address what you're talking about? We can't control plan development projected growth, but we want to do the best we can to anticipate and create transportation plans that contend. Does that address what you're concerned about?
It is in there. But Ian raises an interesting point. I mean, it's almost unfixable. It sort of really requires the community members, these people who are filling out these surveys, to be more active with their local governments and attend board meetings and things like that, or contact their board members and sort of let them know, because I don't see a lot of connection there in the planning. I'm also on, or at least until recently, have been on the Spotsy Transportation Committee. So I see how they operate. I see how the board operates, and it's kind of discouraging, actually, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, I think Ian sort of raises an interesting point. We do need to get the community more involved. I don't know how you do that. That's a big task in itself, but thanks.
That item number 2 that you just highlighted a minute ago would suit me better if you said create transportation plans that complement walkable destinations instead of planned development and projected growth, because that sentence to me sounds like a recipe for sprawl as it's written.
Well, until we dissociate economic development and real estate development in our localities, I think, that's the recipe for sprawl. And until we address that, any of this can be interpreted as a recipe for sprawl. I mean, until we bring businesses here so that, we don't become bedroom communities. Unfortunately, I think many of our localities, the local governments look at it and say, okay, I can get property tax here, so let's build more houses, as opposed to actually improving the economy by providing good local jobs so people don't have to. 40 to 60% of the population don't have to leave the county.
This is Josh Brock. Before I say what I want to say, are we done with that discussion? I don't want to interrupt if anybody has something else they wanted to contribute. No? Can everyone hear me, by the way? I had to
Yes,
reboot.
we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
I had to reboot my computer, so I don't know if everything's working still. So this may be sort of an administrative point, I guess, and I apologize if I didn't hear you go over this because, like I said, I had to reboot my computer. I'm on a laptop and it's overheating. But I'm looking at these goals and objectives, and I don't really have any disagreement with them per se. I mean, I think the goals are great. I think the bullet points listed underneath them are explaining the goals are great. But strictly speaking, they aren't objectives in an organizational sense, right? An objective is sort of a specific a specific thing that you want to accomplish that is guided by a specific metric that you're measuring and is assigned to some unit or employee, something. So you can look at them and go, okay, we've measured you doing this. We know you're getting there. So like some of these are, you could say develop a plan. Okay, the plan might be the metric. Is the plan developed or not? But some of them are, build a transportation system, and strictly speaking, that never ends, right? What does it mean to have built a transportation system, except that obviously there is something there that wasn't there. So I don't know if this is how you intend to use these objectives. And so if they're just sort of elaborations, you can kind of ignore this. But if they are intended to guide specific actions in the organization, then I at least would like to see them paired with a specific metric. And so, we in the CTAC and people in the public who are interested can look at them and see actually, yes, FAMPO is accomplishing these things that they've set out to do and gotten feedback from the population. So it's just a better way of knowing where you are and letting the population know where you are.
I think you're right in that context of what true objective is, but in the reality of what the long range, we're talking 2050 plan. These are foundational. There is, I would really be surprised if anybody ever uses those to measure how well we're doing or not doing, which is what you would expect in a plan. So yeah, I can't disagree with your. So maybe if objective is the wrong words, but they're just more, a little more expansion on what the goal means. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Dave Swan, can I ask a question here?
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, I read your, you put this out to all of us, which I thought was fantastic. But as I read through these, I said, do I have time to go back and read the 2045 plan? And I did not, unfortunately. But has anybody done a comparison of what I assume that you started with the 2045 plan, and then through discussion and some research and knowledge of what's going on with the policy committee, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, economic development in the counties involved, you've crafted some objectives. And I agree with the previous comment that
Dave, let Stacy expand where these came from instead of
conjecture. Oh, all right. Yeah, sure.
Sure. So Adam, a couple months ago, he did a presentation about the original goals, and there were 9 to begin with. So those goals were based on federal requirements. It wasn't a broad picture of what the region wants to achieve with their transportation system. It was, here is what FAMPO is federally required to achieve. So we wanted to broaden those to say, what do we want as a region, and what do community members want to have their transportation look like by the year 2050? So that's why we decided to get away from those original goals and objectives. In the report that's linked in your agenda, it'll walk you through those original 9 goals that we started with. Or actually, I'm sorry, it breaks those down before we present them to the community via survey. We took those 9, and a lot of them were redundant, so we brought them down into 7. And then we put those in a draft survey and sent it to you all and to the TAC. And based on the feedback we got, we revised those even further. And then once we received public comment on those, we revised them even further into what you see today. Does that explain what you're looking for?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and you
Very
can,
well.
the report is 78 pages because it kind of walks you step by step, going backwards actually, of the thought process of here were the original goals, and here's how we thought about the public comment, and here's exactly how we applied that and modified them.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and come up with some mechanics to attack this issue in front of us, since it's maybe not an all or nothing. Do I hear a motion from the floor of anyone, maybe perhaps from Rupert, that one particular item or another should be rewritten or deleted?
I could have several suggestions of things that need to be changed, but you know that I'm more idealistic and you guys are more pragmatic.
Well, I mean, if this is significant enough changes, then I'm willing to have you present those, and then we will one by one say, do you approve or don't approve? I mean, we got to get through this, so that's what I'm saying. You want to do that?
All right. I already mentioned that number 2, that I thought that would be more environmentally friendly and financially friendly, for that matter, to change planned development and projected growth to walkable destinations.
Goal number 1, which one? Goal number 2, element number 2, objective number 2?
That's right.
So, okay. So we have does anyone support Rupert's proposal that we delete that one?
I didn't say delete the whole thing, did I?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, what would you like? What would you like it to read?
I said delete planned development and projected growth and replace it with walkable destinations.
Okay. So we have a proposal. Do you? Is there anyone in favor of changing the wording from planned development and projected growth to walkable destinations?
It might be faster if I just read off several of them, because I know that no one's going to support it. That's the way it has been at CTAG for many years.
Then what's the point, Farley? I mean, if you know that, or Rupert, I'm sorry, if you know that, well, I mean, I was trying to give them each one credence. I was trying to give each one credence and a full worth. So
I appreciate that, but historically, nobody wants to undermine the single occupant vehicle transportation system. Nobody on CTAG anyway. I'm the only one that's pushing for reversion to a mass transit-based system. The point I'm trying to make is that there's at least one person on the record that spoke up for doing the right thing.
Okay.
And so by stating these things, I can say that I gave it a shot, but I suspect that no one's going to give me a second.
Well, okay, then here's another approach to that. We say that Rupert in the minutes, we'll say objective to the wording or recommended the wording for, goal 2, number 2, be changed from planned development, projected growth to walkable destinations.
Yeah.
Unless you want to go down that route, and then we'll just list them all. And
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. And you want to hear some more? Okay, line 3, I would change the last 3 words from multimodal travel options to mass transit to ensure that so it would read, ensure that major residential, commercial, and public developments are designed to accommodate mass transit and not necessarily include cars.
Okay.
And number 6, that should be striked out completely, I think. Strategically fund projects for all modes of transportation, because we don't want to keep funding more automobile-oriented projects. Number 7, strike the word infrastructure. Instead of saying ensure public transportation infrastructure, say ensure public transportation funding, because infrastructure is not the problem with mass transit. Funding for operating expenses is the problem. Number 9, strike out the words all modes of transportation and say, so it reads secure more funding for transit operating expenses, which is kind of a duplication of the last one. Goal 4, number 3, I'll let that one ride. Ignore that one. Goal 4, number 8, strike the word autonomous. They're talking about plan for and support the use of electric, autonomous, and connected vehicles. Encouraging autonomous vehicles makes the situation worse instead of better. Goal number 5, line 5, I would insert the word at the beginning, sustainably reduce congestion and increase the reliability of the transportation system. So those would be my proposals.
Okay. Are there other changes recommended?
I want to address sort of a point that Rupert raises, and I think that Ian kind of touched on.
No, I don't think we need to debate them. Are there other corrections or changes to what's presented? I want to call the motion.
But it is a valid point. We can ask for multimodal transportation. That's something that's in our purview.
All right, go ahead, Al.
That's something that's in our purview. Multimodal transportation is within our purview. What the counties decide to do about spread, we have no influence on that. That's up to the counties. So I mean, I think it is a little unrealistic.
Al, I'm the chairman. I'm going to wrap the gavel here. Are you commenting on Rupert's suggestions, or are you creating another suggestion?
I'm sort of replying, I'm addressing Rupert's suggestion.
Okay. So all right, then I'm gonna shut you off there. Is there anyone who has a suggestion without discussion or debate of changes that are required to the goals and objectives that's presented before you? Please speak up.
May it please the chair, this is Neil Holleran with Spotsy County. I make a motion to proceed on voting on these goals and objectives.
You want to call the motion? All right. The motion has been called.
Second.
All right. Thank you. All right. Now, so we have captured before I go to that, we have captured the objections and the changes, so they are on the record and they will be reflected in the minutes, which is important. Now, the motion has been called. If we have a second, all in favor of endorsing the recommended goals and objectives for the 2050 long-range transportation plan, please go hot mic and say aye.
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 All who would like to abstain, please state your name. All who object, say nay.
Nay.
Nay, Dave Swan.
Okay, so the ayes carry it. There was two objections. The rest were no abstentions, and the rest were ayes. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
did Mr. Durante second the motion? Because they were, if so, it was two motions from the same jurisdiction. We would need someone else to second it.
Yes.
Neil called the motion.
And I second. We need another second from outside of spots.
Yeah, someone else second from a different jurisdiction, please.
Jeez. Okay, let's back up. Do we have someone from outside Spotsylvania to second the original motion? All right, we do not have a second, so there'll be no action taken on this motion. Okay. No worries. Let's move on then. Smart scale, Matt, give us the highlights.
Yes, so let me start by saying this is quite a long presentation. The intention here, though, is not to go through the whole presentation. The intention, of course, is to provide all of the information. So that is what I have done. The presentation doesn't want to present, so I'm just going to go from here. So really, the outline would be just to provide an understanding of the smart scale process, results from rounds 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the next steps. So outlined in these few slides are the fact that we changed from category A to B, the scoring process, the funding process, and the overall smart scale schedule for this round. So we're currently in February, and we'll get to where we are at later on. I also want to provide a little note here. Information on all of these projects can be found at this link. On the Smart Scale website, they have a dashboard where you can view all kinds of information, click on projects, their details, costs, sketches, and all of that shown on a very nice, pretty map where you can look through the Fredericksburg area. So here are the round 1 projects. All of the projects from round 1 are listed that received funding, project title, type of work, the score they received, their cost, their score divided by the cost, which is how Smart Scale does it, and then tentative start dates and delivery dates. Now these should be noted with an asterisk that some of these are definitely off by a little bit, and they may not have been updated that very recently. For instance, Rappahannock River Crossing, as we all probably know, is still being constructed, but it shows that it should have been finished in 2018. So take these with a grain of salt, but hopefully they can provide you all with a general idea of where some of these projects are at. And as I stated, you can go to the project dashboard and view further information on a lot of these. Smart Scale Round 2, again, all the information that I said last time on the projects, tentative start dates, delivery dates, cost, score, and the type of projects that received funding. And then Round 3, same thing, projects, type of work, benefit, cost, score, and tentative start dates. So this is the previous round of Smart Scale, and now we are into Round 4. Round 4 scores just came out in January, so highlighted in blue are the projects that are tentatively to receive funding, their total project cost, how much was actually requested in Smart Scale by the jurisdiction, the benefit score, the Smart Scale score, which is the project benefit score divided by the Smart Scale request cost, and then the type of funding it's receiving. You can find further information on these funding programs in that previous slide that we mentioned up top, as well as the Smart Scale website. And this is where most of the Smart Scale funding comes from. So now what I will do is talk about the specific projects that we got funding for. So FAMPO got 3 out of 4 projects for over $30 million. GWRC received funding for 1 out of 4 for almost $10 million. So notably, I will go through these here. They're also summarized right here. So FAMPO Route 208 operational multimodal improvements. I'm not going to read through everything on this slide. It would take a bit of time, but in essence, the bullet points here that you'll see are taken from the description of each project. And then the scorecard here is basically the Smart Scale scorecard that VDOT provides with how each project was scored, the project cost, and its total score. So you can see all of the types of factors listed here, their measures, those values, their weight, and how much scoring each of these projects actually received for them, as well as then the project cost, and then their final score. And shown up here is basically the extent of each of these projects. So this is Route 208 operational multimodal improvements in Spotsylvania County near the Route 208 Commonwealth Drive, Park and Ride lot, and then Route 208 along here. And then as well, it provided for each of these projects their projected sketch, what they may look like in the future. Of course, these will likely change, but hopefully it gives everyone a good idea of what kind of improvements we're looking at. So as mentioned, these are really operational improvements to the roadway here. Lafayette Boulevard, again, same types of information. Lafayette Boulevard, really the major items are transit stops along the Fred F3 service, and then the sidewalk, and then the same park and ride lot improvements that are at the Route 208 park and ride lot. And here's the tentative project sketch of what it could look like with bus stops, sidewalk, and another bus stop along the roadway. So this is a really good project because it'll help provide connectivity between some major destinations along the roadway, the major shopping center here, gas station, bus stops, Family Dollar, and so on. I-95 exit 126 star study improvements. Basically improvements to the intersection here, the Route 1 intersection at exit 126, and then an additional northbound lane on I-95. Again, the project sketches from the study that just came from the exit 126 star study. If you want more information on that, I'm sure you could search it up on the VDOT website for the exit 126 star study, and you'll find a lot more information on what the study was calling for and specifics on that. US 17 business star study improvements. Another project came out of a study. They're looking at operational improvements essentially along US 17, just some roadway, turn lane improvements, bus stop improvements, and so on. And then not FAMPA or Judiciary, but the city of Fredericksburg, US Route 1 stars Augustine Avenue intersection improvements. So just some minor improvements to the roadway here, cutting off some of the roadways that kind of intersect here with this side road, and so on, improving other items here, such as sidewalks. Idlewild Boulevard to VCR Trail Connector, another Fredericksburg project. And this project is adding a shared use path connection from the sidewalk at Idlewild Boulevard to the VCR Trail down here in the city of Fredericksburg. Route 2 and 17 widening from City Line to Shannon Airport. This is a pretty big project. The main component is widening Route 2 along this roadway for additional capacity. And you can see it extends through a good portion from the city all the way over to Shannon Airport. And then Route 1 and 208 area multimodal and revitalization improvements. These are improvements to an intersection commonly known as 4 Mile Fork. So it comes from a study again, but making operational improvements to the roadway, turn lanes, curbs, sidewalks, and whatnot. And then additionally to this area, there's also a couple of sidewalks to be added, and importantly along Lafayette Boulevard, helping to further connection along this roadway. And then also along US 1 sidewalk additions. Route 1 and Lay Hill Road improvements. This is a Stafford County project. It's making widening and right turn and turn lane improvements to Lay Hill Road here and this intersection with Route 1, as well as some sidewalks. And then in one of our rural jurisdictions, Caroline County, Town of Bowling Green, US 301 and Chase Street. This is a project that actually FAMPA staff worked a bit on, our rural work plan. We did a rural work plan with the Town of Bowling Green, comprehensive plan updates, and parts of this project came out of that, and then one of our staff members worked with them on the project and submitting it for Smart Scale. So this project actually received, I believe, the second or third highest score in the jurisdiction, so it was received quite well, and we're excited about this one especially. So commuter parking lot additions, bike ped additions, and then roadway additions at Route 1. And some of those are defined here. So those are all the FAMPA area projects and Judiciary area projects that received funding. So the next steps really from now until April, the CTB is developing revisions to staff recommended funding scenario, which is what you currently saw. So any revisions will be developed, and then a public hearing on the recommended scenario, and any potential revisions would be done April to May. And then the May CTB meeting, revised funding scenario will be developed and presented. And then in the June CTB meeting, everything will be adopted in the 6-year improvement program. And I'm happy to take any questions. That is the end. Thank you.
Matt, that was exactly what I anticipated. This is, I recommend this briefing to all of us as to use as a guide that we can use later on when somebody asks us about what happened in Smart Scale 1, what happened in what's going on in Smart Scale 4, things on the project. I mean, it's all laid down here for us as a reference tool. Very, very handy, and thank you very much for that, Matt. Any questions on the presentation? Okay, hearing none. Thanks, Matt. Meeting calendar update. We have a change in the calendar.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You will see the latest version of the meetings calendar. This was updated since BPAC had their February meeting. And you will see, especially for our public visitors, the highlighted dates in green indicating that CTAC meets monthly every second Wednesday at 6 p.m., currently 100% virtual, unless we had to make changes as we did last month for various holiday or other kind of scheduling conflicts. So we moved April 14th to April 7th, June 9th to June 16th, and July 14th to July 7th, which is not reflected, and I will get to that in a moment. And the November meeting was not moved at all after some discussion and remains at November 10th. So the policy committee meeting met in January, the end of January, and at that meeting they decided to move the summer break up from August to July. If CTAC follows suit, you will not meet in July and resume on Wednesday, August 16th at 6 p.m., which is what is presented in this proposed draft. Once again, a vote is not required. However, confirmation of the date change specifically for August or the move from July to August is recommended, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, there was kind of a light bulb went off, and somebody says, "Wait a minute, the staff, the county and the city, they usually aren't in session in July. So why don't we not have these other meetings? So we really have a month off in the summer of July rather than August. So that really kind of drove that. So
yes, we're trying to better align with the jurisdictions, and you will see that actually BPAC is meeting at the end of July, but they're the special case.
Right. Okay, at this time we have another opportunity for public comment. Anyone who's anyone in the member of the public who is called in would like to make a comment, please do it now. All right, hearing none, seeing none, we'll move on to correspondence. Stacy.
Yeah, so I'll be quick. I know everyone's kind of getting late. You're probably getting tired. Just two things for correspondence. One is a document that I've highlighted. It reflects the progress that Fred Transit has made so far in this fiscal year towards its goals and objectives. So you can take some time when you have it to read through if you're interested. And then the next piece of correspondence is news article saying that the longtime planner for the city of Fredericksburg, Eric Nelson, and also the former TAC chairman has retired. And we can move on to staff reports if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So just two quick things for you. I was asked to just give a brief little summary of the transportation alternatives application. that is going on, well, that's being discussed at the Bike and Ped Committee recently. So there we see again the transportation alternatives jargon. So that is a grant program for bike and pedestrian projects. There's also some environmental mitigation and community improvement projects that are allowed with that. You'll hear it mentioned at the Bike and Pedestrian Committee. However, FAMPO's staff's role in it is to just encourage localities to apply. It's the localities that apply, not FAMPO. And then FAMPO staff will also ask the policy committee to just give their endorsement, a symbolic endorsement of those projects to help bolster their application. So if you hear that, that's what it's about. The localities won't have their candidate project applications ready until the summer. If you're interested in hearing what those projects are, tune into the Bike and Pedestrian Committee meeting in the summertime where Carrie Barber will present information on that. The last thing to mention, I was also asked just to make CTAC aware if you've tuned into the TAC meetings recently. We did have them endorse some amendments to the TIP, that's the Transportation Improvement Program. You can think of that as a short range plan. It lists transportation projects that are going to be funded in the short term. And we needed them to approve some amendments. They were minor administrative changes, and because of that, they don't require any kind of public comment. So if you hear, those in a TAC meeting recording, that's what that was about. And that's all I have. It's back to you, Mr. Chairman, and you wanted me to remind you at this time to ask CTAC members if they have anything you would like them to report to the policy committee.
That's right. It's off the top of your head, you probably won't have anything, but I think one thing that ought to come out of our meeting, because our meetings proceeds the PC, is there anything that the members say, hey, please make sure we make our position known on this subject or that subject when you represent us, and I don't mean me, but whoever is the president, the committee chair of this committee, which will be someone else here in a few months, that when you go to the PC meeting the following week, here's what we really want you to speak to or make a point about. So this is kind of a new thought for us, CTAC, to be a little more active and to be more advisory to the policy committee. So maybe some of you have something like that off the top of your head, and if you do, bring it up when we go through the memo reports. But in the future, try and think of that each month. Is there something we really want to bring forward? So let's go through the memo reports. Any of the members from Fredericksburg? Any of the members from Stafford have something to report?
Yeah, Dave Swan. I'd like to comment on the walking distance discussion that Rupert said earlier, and I do support his effort on that. And I didn't get a chance to say that, but I do now. And I just want to point out that that's already in the plan in Stafford County for Embry Mill, which is a very large project. And there is plans in there for walking distance shops and shopping. And we have a brand new Publix market on the south end of that development. And it's within walking distance. So I just thought I'd bring that out. Otherwise, nothing else from Stafford.
Okay, nothing else from Stafford, so Spotty. Any member reports? Okay, King George. Any member reports? Caroline County, any member reports? At large.
This is Larry. Can you hear me?
You're loud and clear.
I just want to compliment Stacy again on her social media. pretty good job on social media, and there was a YouTube video that she had posted out there on the Bike and Ped group. And I wondered about the Bike and Ped group these days, and it turns out they're alive and well, and they're on it. So I recommend anyone who's got an interest might want to tune in. It looks like to me that committee has come back and they're pretty active.
They are, right.
Larry, you should know there's something wrong with your microphone. It's clicking.
I apologize. I don't know what it is. Is that better?
No,
I can
it's
say
not.
still there.
That's
Sorry.
Any other comments from anyone?
Move adjournment.
Do I have a second?
Second, Dave Swan.
All in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.